the famed missionary Joseph Damien from Belgium ministered in Hawaii, in the island of Molokai, where all the people with leprosy from Hawaii were sent to be treated. And Damien went in place of his brother who'd suddenly passed away. So he arrives into Molokai, one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and he's treating these people with leprosy. My wife and I had the privilege of going to Molokai and seeing what kind of work he had established. He built a chapel there. He would put his arms around them. He would embrace them. Every morning he would have a chapel for them. All of a sudden, one day he's pouring a kettle of boiling water into a cup. The water comes swirling out and falls onto his bare foot. He noticed for the first time he had no feeling. He was stunned. He took the same kettle, gently poured it onto the other foot, no feeling. He knew what had happened. He'd contracted leprosy. That morning, nobody in the audience knew why he said what he did. He always began his sermons by saying, "My fellow believers." This morning, he began by saying, "My fellow lepers." My fellow lepers. There's a grave there that marks his burial site. So I asked the guide, "So this is where Damien is buried?" They said, "No, he was. But the Belgian government demanded that his body be flown back. He was a hero to them. And they asked for the body to be sent back." The people resisted, but the Belgian government had its way to get the body back. But the people there with leprosy said, "Could you cut off that right hand, or that right arm, one of the two, and bury it here? And take the rest of the body back," because that was the hand that touched us. That was the hand that touched us. It is ironic in Corinth today to look at all of the horrible things that went up on the mountain. At the temple of Aphrodite stood there, and right at the bottom of that mountain is the church at Corinth, and outside that church, carved in stone, is 1 Corinthians 13. That great chapter on love. The counter perspectives sat there, one against the other. They're going to have to see. Number two, it's going to have to be a message that's not merely argued, but also felt. It has to be felt. There has to be that conviction. We hear so little of this these days, it's troubling me, so that everything becomes cerebral, and so little of that personal walk with Christ that he calls us to. You see, I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide when I was 17. In fact, I'm standing by any moment now to get a telephone call from Calgary, because the man who sent the individual with the Bible in his hand to come to my hospital room in Delhi while I was a teen, facing hopelessness and therefore tried to take my own life. This man by the name of John Tabe in Calgary, Alberta, is in his last hours of life. And 3 months ago on a phone, he said to me, "Would you do me the favor of coming and preaching at my funeral while I'm gone?" So these last 2 days, we've been talking back and forth of John Tabe in his final hours. What I want to say to you is this: I was a man who was lost. I was a man who was headed in the wrong direction. And this Bible is brought into my hospital room, and I give my life to Jesus Christ. That moment didn't end at that moment. That has lasted me over all these decades of life and kept me going. That as a lost individual, Christ sent somebody to my room with the Word of God, which I'd never owned and never opened in my life, that God cared enough for me to send the message to me in my hospital room. And that's why Francis Thompson writes, "O world invisible, we view thee. O world intangible, we touch thee. O world unknowable, we know thee. Inapprehensible, we clutch thee. Does a fish soar to find the ocean? An eagle plunge to find the air? Do we ask of the stars in motion if they have rumor of thee there? Not where the wheeling systems darken, or our benumbed conceiving soars. The drift of pinions would we hearken, beats on our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places, touch but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis your estranged faces that have missed the many splendored thing. But when so sad thou canst not sadder, crying upon thy so sore loss, shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder between heaven and Charing Cross. Yea, in the night, my soul, my daughter, cry clutching heaven by the hems, lo, Christ walking on the water, not of Gennesaret, but Thames." Francis Thompson lived between Thames and Charing Cross. He lived between Thames and Charing Cross. He would buy his drugs on Charing Cross. He was homeless by this point, wrapped his raincoat around him by the River Thames, and would go to sleep at night by that. Yea, in the night, my soul, my daughter, cry clutching heaven by the hems, lo, Christ walking on the water, not of Gennesaret, but Thames. He is nearer to you than you realize. And this conviction must stay within your heart. How real is this Christ to you? How real is he near to the deepest feeling of your life? Here's what I want to say. When you feel the conviction of sin, it's not just here, it's here. You feel it here. Intense is the agony when the eye begins to see, the ear begins to hear, the heart begins to throb, and the pulse begins to feel. How when the soul feels its flesh and the flesh feels its chains. That's intense. If sin becomes intense as a real feeling, why not the indwelling presence of God himself? We must understand it is not just here, it is the knowledge of Christ's presence in your life and mine. So it's not going to only have to be heard, it's going to have to be seen. It's not merely going to have to be argued, but it's also going to be felt.